and define some important statistical terms and notations, because in statistics we will be dealing with several notations and symbols. Should be able to distinguish between what is descriptive and what is inferential statistics. Distinguish between qualitative and quantitative variables, between discrete variable and continuous variable. Should be able to distinguish among the nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio level measurement. Distinguish between the terms mutually exclusive and exhaustive. Illustrate methods of statistical inference. Explore MS Excel add-ins and SPSS. Finally, relate the role of statistics in business. So when you say statistics class, it means it's actually a science of data collection, but not only on data collection, but also in organizing the data and then analyzing. And then it doesn't stop there. You need to present it to an audience, because the data that you have collected is actually a raw data. You cannot comprehend the meaning behind the data, but after the analysis and when you present it, then you'll be able to see the meaning beyond those numbers and those descriptions. Interpret numerical data for the purpose. There's a purpose, and that is as a basis in making decision, more effective decision making. And you have to differentiate statistics from the word statistic, because that word without an S refers to a measure obtained from a sample. Later on, I'm going to discuss what a sample is and what is a population. Statistic without an S is a single value, which is a measurement taken from a sample. Now, who uses statistics? There are several applications of statistics. It is a multidisciplinary subject. You use it in interpreting, or it can be used in some news reports, poll results, game standing, unemployment rates, if you're going to describe the trend of unemployment rates, and then business trends also and forecasts. So these are some of information that we have today wherein statistics play a role. And then give example on statistics also in as applied to business and economics. You can use that in politics and government, banking, accounting, and many others. That's why you shouldn't neglect statistics as a subject, because once you have a full comprehension of this subject, you have an edge over other practitioners later on. When you practice your profession and you know how to really analyze data, friend, you have an edge. That's an additional skill. Now, types of statistics, we have descriptive statistics, wherein you're going to only describe the data. You're going to summarize, present the data, but there is no conclusion there, because you only describe its proportion. In this case, how many percent, or what is the proportion of this particular measurement with respect to the total. And then you have also, let's say, you're going to describe only the frequency. You're going to describe the measure of central tendency, such as the mean, the mode, and the median. So that is what descriptive statistics is. There is no inferential approach. You have to only describe in terms of measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. So descriptive statistics. Basic terms that you need to understand. When you deal with data, you have to understand what is an element, what is a variable, observation, data, random variable, and data set. So I'm going to discuss each one of this in the next slide. Okay, we have already here different, this is a table. The source is from a Business Week taken. The data is dated May 27, 2010. As you can see, this is a one-time data. So that This column right here under the company heading is what you call elements. So, for example, result of your survey, respondent 1, respondent 2, respondent 3, they are elements. And column headers after the company, other column headers, exchange, the ticker symbol, the business week rank, these are variables. Other variables could be that, let's say, these are names of person, individual, Maria, Pedro, Hannah, etc. And then you have here height, weight. So those height, weight, including the names, these are variables because it could assume any measurement. Variables yan. And then the data. For example, under GC Homes, wherein the ticker symbol is APOL, and that is a data. No? And for one set of data, one set of observation, including this one, ayan, ang tawag dyan, observation yan. Because for one entity or one element, you have various variables corresponding to this M-care. So you call that observation. Kaya, balikan natin yung previous slide kanina. Elements, entities, no, in which data are collected. Variable, it can assume any values. Observation is a set of measurements. Data are values that variables can assume. Random variables are variables whose values are determined by chance. That's why it's called random. And then data set. Kaya if you have a set or a data that consists of, let's say, from a survey with respondents equal to 1,000, then you have 1,000 elements. And then, let's say, you're going to collect the profile of these respondents in terms of marital status, in terms of age, in terms of gender. Then those I have mentioned are called variables. Kaya, when you have a data, such as this one, just by looking at the table, medyo, because this is a raw data class, hindi pa siya if you are going to describe it, medyo boring siyang tingnan, no, di ba? But if you present this like in trends, kung anong pattern, kung may grouping tayo, then that would mean a different, or that would give you a picture and you can interpret that easily. Kaya pagka nag-gather kayo ng data at i-present nyo sa audience na ganito, teka lang, lalo na pag marami yan, wait lang, I cannot comprehend that. You need to present it, synthesize it, organize it, summarize it. Kasi this one is a raw data. Now, if I'm going to ask you, okay, anong company dito na may earnings per share na mas nandito sila sa category na mataas? Hindi naman to naka-arrange, di ba? This is ungrouped. As you can see, it's not even rank. Kaya you really need to present it not simply as a raw data. Kasi minsan, nakikita ko yung iba na nagpe-present, raw data yan. I don't understand that. You need to really summarize it first before you present it to your audience. And how are we going to do that? Okay, later, kasi meron tayong data presentation. Now, still under descriptive, you have definition, you have sampling techniques. So you need to be familiar with techniques or sampling techniques. Presentation of data, measures of central tendency, variability or measures of description. You have to acquaint yourself with those terms. Remember from your high school about terms like skewness, kurtosis, normally distributed, and these are terms that you need to be familiar with. Another type of statistics is what we call inferential statistics, wherein this will serve as a basis in making decision. You estimate, because it's inferential. Once you use the term inferential, that is actually just an estimate. It could be a point estimate. It could be an interval estimate. So you predict, you forecast, and then you generalize from a sample to a population. Kaya, pag inferential stat, there's always hypothesis. There's always hypothesis, class. And it's always quantitative. Because inferential statistics, numerical, you will be dealing with numbers in this case. Inferential yan. Whereas descriptive, pwede kang mag-narrative doon, pwede kang mag-describe verbally doon. No? Description siya eh. Pero pag inferential, nako, teka lang. You're dealing with numbers there. And you sample from a population, but your conclusion will be generalizing from a sample, from a result of a sample to the population. So we have, as I have said, inferential. Kaya pagka magsasite tayo ng example dun sa descriptive and inferential, ito yung isa, no? Experimental study of a new drug to know if it will reduce the number of heart attacks in men over 70 years of age. This is what you call inferential statistics, an example of inferential. Like din sa situation natin ngayon, we have several types of vaccines. And still, even though they're not admitting it, partially, you can say experimental pa rin yan because hindi pa siya fully tested, wala pang historical data, bago pa lang nangyari yung COVID, last mag to 2 years pa lang siya. And actually, we don't have any idea of the efficacy to how effective and which vaccine is more effective than the other compared to the other. So, experimental study yon. You get a sample, kaya nagsasample sila initially kung sino yung mag-volunteer na magpa-vaccine. And then, they get result from those sample and generalize it to the population. Now, example 2, classifying air as healthy or unhealthy. Of course, you cannot obtain a whole, yung buong hangin. So, you only need to sample a quantity of air from EDSA, for example, so that you can conclude na at this particular time, quality of air is quite not healthy. And then after, pag hindi na peak hour, medyo nagbago yung quality of air. So meron tayong ganyang sample. Collecting data on the volume of traffic flow in the busy street of Manila, pwede rin ganon. That's another example of inferential stat. Kasi hindi, nagbavary siya, class, no? You can only get a sample for a particular situation and then generalize it, but may limitation siya because you cannot generalize na, it holds true sa lahat, only for that particular setting. So you need to also realize the limitation of your data. Now, inferential, again, meron tayong mga several tests, and I'm sure that you're familiar with some of them. We have a Z-test, we have a T-test, F-test, and many other kinds of tests. Ite-test mo tong lahat ng to, kaya siya tinawag na test. At meron kang hypothesis dito. Ite-test mo mismo yung hypothesis using this different statistical test. Okay, so later on, magkakaroon tayo ng outline of all these tests and kailan natin gagamitin ang bawat isa. Now, sources of statistical data, we have several sources. You can obtain data from government agencies such as the Philippine Statistical PSA. No? They call PSA right now, NSO dati. And then publish data, but it's not always reliable and even not always available also. Sometimes you need to pay to be able to obtain the data. And then one way of collecting data is getting it yourself, like in survey. So that when you collect the data yourself, such as in survey, that is what you call primary data. But when you collect the data from a certain source, then that is what you call secondary data. Okay, class? Pag secondary data, usually hindi yan raw data, kundi group data na yan. To preserve the identity, confidentiality of each individual involved. Kung mayroon ng mga tao doon, so may mga Data Privacy Act pa tayong dapat na i-observe Kaya yung data class, no, is very expensive. Hindi siya basta na kukunin mo lang. You need to ask permission if it's a secondary data. Now, if it's a primary data, you need to go through the process of really validating your instrument, validating the process para yung data makolect mo talagang valid siya. Kasi pagka mali na yung data na nakolect mo, ay wala na tayong pag-uusapan doon sa thesis mo. Kasi mali na yung lahat. No? Starts from the data. Another sources of statistical data, you have employee records. That's one data. You need to know the name, the address, and several information under employee records. But then again, employee records, you cannot easily obtain that from a company. It's confidential. Production records from, let's say, a manufacturing plant. Paano na-produce? Ilan ang na-produce for a certain shift? Medyo, ano din yan, that's confidential also, no? You need to ask permission for each of these data. Inventory records, sales records, credit records, and so on. Kaya kung may gagawin kayong thesis, first, you need to think, reflect. Ma-access ko ba tong data na to? Kasi kung hindi nyo ma-access yung data for that particular topic na pinili nyo, then there we have a problem sa umpisa pa lang. Kaya may mga pagkakataon na nag-propose sila, or proposal, no? Proposal of a thesis topic. And then, later on, na-realize nila na, ay, hindi ma-access yung data. Naku, paano? Anong gagawin? Di magsisimula ka ulit from scratch. Bubuo ka na naman ulit ng panibagong topic. Gagawin na naman ulit ninyo yung formulation of research problems. Magre-research na naman kayo ng background of the study, yung related literature, and so on. It will cost you time and effort, kaya you need to really reflect if the data is accessible, or if I have, or if you have a permission to obtain the data. Now, this is very important, levels of measurement. You need to realize that there are 4 levels of measurement before you collect the data. We have number 1, nominal level. This refers to data that are categorized. They are not ranked. For example, marital status. You cannot say na mauna si single kaysa married, di ba? It's not, wala tayong rule doon na sinasabing, oh sige mauna, dapat first si single, second si married. Although usually we observe na nauuna si single, pero pwede rin namang mauna si married, right? Like eye color. Hindi ko pwedeng sabihin na palaging mauna si black pag nagka-categorize ako. So, walang ranking dito sa nominal level. Nilalagyan lang siya ng numeric code for the purpose of encoding para mas mapabilis. Let's say, for example, gender. Lalagyan ko ng female na 1 at ang male ay 2. Para pag nang-i-encode ako sa Excel or sa SPSS, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 na lang. Hindi na ako magta-type ng male, female, right? So, meaning to say, kung may makita man kayong mga numbers dyan, those numbers you cannot perform arithmetic on those numbers. You cannot get average on those numbers because those numbers are merely assigned as a code for nominal level data, right? Kaya usually yung nominal level ay nakukuha natin sa mga demographic profile, male, female, marital status, educational attainment, address, etc. These are nominal level data. And we also have to know kung anong ibig sabihin ng mutually exclusive. Pag sinabing mutually exclusive, isa lang talaga ang isang entity ay nabilong lang sa isang category. Let's say, ako, my eye color is black. I cannot have a blue color of the eye at the same time. So these are what you call mutually exclusive na category. Pero meron din tayong exhaustive. Ano naman yun? When an entity or element can have more than one category. Let's say, for example, in this case, I gave religious affiliation. Of course, practical naman, no? In reality, you can have 2 religion. Pero in our case, as members of the INC, that's not possible. But in other religions, okay lang sa kanila yon. you can also have 2 gadgets. Hindi naman naka-state na, kailangan laptop ka lang, hindi ka pwedeng mag-tablet. So these are examples of exhaustive. Okay, nakuha niyo yung class, ha? And then the next level, so unang level natin is nominal. Second level natin is ordinal. Ano naman yung ordinal level? Ordinal level is when you can rank your data. When you can say, okay, first, second, third. So ordinal level exhibits the properties of nominal data. Halos kapareho siya, pero makapag-arrange ka doon. May sequence, makapag-rank ka doon. However, hindi mo pa rin pwedeng gawan ng arithmetic operation. Kasi if ever nag-rank ka ng first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, hindi mo pwedeng ipag-add si 1 tsaka si 5 para magkaroon ka ng average doon. No, it's meaningless. So, parang ang purpose lang din ng pag-assign mo ng 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ay for the purpose of encoding. Now, we have an argument in social sciences na, ma'am, gumagamit sila ng Likert scale doon, such that kung 5 scale yon, strongly agree, disagree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, you have 5 levels or 5 scales. So nag-a-assign ka ng 5 sa strongly agree is 4, neutral is 3, and so on. Pero these are just numbers. Pero ang ginagawa ng iba, kinukuha nila yung mean ng 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kung ano yung sagot. Well, may argument ang social science researchers doon. Kasi pwede naman daw, kasi usually ang kanilang mga variables are latent variables. Hindi ba wala kang yardstick to measure that. Let's say behavior. Wala akong yardstick to measure behavior. Let's say love. Wala akong yardstick to measure love. Unlike yung height, yung weight, meron tayong yardstick doon. Meron tayong instrument to really measure na pag sinabi kong height ko ay 5'2", walang argument doon. Hindi pwedeng 5'5" yan kasi may standard measurement tayo doon. Pero may mga variables kasi na mahirap siyang i-measure. That's why gumagamit tayo ng Likert scale or Likert questions. Pero one way of really making use of average and so on is to perform summative measurements doon. Let's say may 5 questions ka, ipagsasum mo yung mga responses, pwede yon. So, third level is what you call interval level. Ito naman yung numbers na. Kasi, yung kanina, nominal, ordinal, those are categorical levels. Category sila. Pero ito, this is what you call scale. Ang tawag doon sa SPSS, scale na siya. Dalawa to interval level and ratio level. Ang interval level class is yung mga values are equally spaced. Such as when you count, I'm not going to count na 1, 1.5, no. When you count, like for example, number of students in a class, I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So may yung distance ng dalawang counts are equally spaced. Wala siyang natural 0 point. Ibig sabihin, yung 0 doesn't mean na wala. Like for example, temperature. When I say 0 temperature, it doesn't mean na walang temperature. It's just so happen na 0 yung reading doon. Kasi meron pa tayong negative na values ng temperature. Especially for degrees Celsius and Fahrenheit. Pero pag Kelvin, of course, absolute temperature yan. Another example is IQ test, no? Kasi may IQ din tayo na negative. So, yung mga to, interval level, ito yung ang 0 ay may meaning. There is no natural 0 point. So, pag sinabi kong 0, hindi ibig sabihin na wala. Alright? So, that's interval level. Finally, we have ratio level, in which yung differences ng ratios ay may meaning. Kasi dito, ang difference ng ratios ay walang meaning. Dito naman sa ordinal level, pagka kukunin mo yung difference ng 5 and 2, 5 and 4, it doesn't mean na pareho sa difference ng 3 and 2. Diba? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say sa Likert scale. Yung difference ng strongly agree and agree ay hindi pareho sa difference ng strongly disagree at disagree. Correct? Kasi nag-assign ka nga lang ng values doon. Pero dito sa interval level, ang difference ng 90 and 80 is 10 units. Pareho yan sa difference ng 60 at saka 50. 10 units din. Kaya pwede mo masabi na merong differences doon sa kanilang measurements. Pero yung ratio dito walang meaning. Kasi ang ratio dito lang magkakaroon ng meaning sa ratio level. So, yan ang difference ng interval at saka ratio. Aside from yung zero nila, there is nothing of that variable. Kaya pag sinabi kong wala akong pera, wala talaga. Diba? Walang boto, walang bumoto sa'yo, wala talaga. Kaya yung zero sa kanila, ibig sabihin wala. Pero dito, sa interval level, ang zero, hindi ibig sabihin na wala. Kasi mayroon pang, may meaning yung zero doon. Right? Now, let's proceed to types of variables. Meron tayong qualitative, meron tayong qualitative and quantitative. Another word for qualitative is categorical. Okay? So, pag sinabi mong qualitative, kaya may mga thesis na qualitative yung approach because they're dealing with words. They're not dealing with numbers. You cannot perform arithmetic operations for qualitative data, such as gender, religious affiliation, place of birth, etc. Whereas quantitative, you can perform arithmetic operations because these are numerical measurements. Let's say height, weight. You can add up the height and get the average. Number of children in a family. You count. So these are numbers. Kaya quantitative, numbers yan. May mga thesis tayo na quantitative yung approach. No? And then types of variables pa rin, extend natin yon under quantitative. Meron tayong discrete variables at meron tayong continuous. What's the difference between these two? When you say discrete, it's from a measurement, from a count. It's from counting, whereas continuous is from a measurement. When you count, you have 1, 2, 3. So those are number of bedrooms, for example, in a house, number of children in the playroom. So those are from a count. Pero pag continuous variables, measurement yan. Let's say number of minutes or number of hours it takes to fly from Manila to Cebu. The height of a person. So, continuous variables yan. Anong tawag? Blood pressure. Diba? So, these are measured variables. And extend it further pa rin. Quantitative variables, aside from having discrete and continuous, we can also have dependent and independent variables. When you say dependent, this refers to outcome variable. Let's say ngayon, number of cases, number of persons infected, or number of cases per day. Dependent variable yan because there are many factors that may affect the increase or decrease of the number of cases, COVID cases per day. What are these? It may be government restrictions. It may be the weather. It may be the attitude of the people, no? The population. So, dependent variable yon. This refers to outcome variable or test scores in this case. Sa example dito, there are many factors that could affect the test scores. Now, what are these factors? Ang tawag naman doon, independent variable or explanatory variable. So say for example, number of hours spent in studying that may affect the test scores. Kaya yung number of hours would be your independent variable, and then the test score, which is the outcome variable, kasi hindi ka naman masyadong nag-aral, then your test score may vary. It could go high, it could go low. And then we also have confounding variables, which are those variables that was not separated from the independent variable, pero they were not measured, and so But somehow it affects the outcome variable, but it was not considered in your study. Let's say you want to measure the scores of exam of the students, but you only consider those factors like number of hours that they study, their location from the school. Like before, you still have to attend in-person um, classroom or studying. Let's say, for example, yung difficulty ng subject, pero hindi na consider yung condition mo habang nag-take ka ng exam. It could be na you're not well. So those are compounding variables, right? So when you study, when you conduct a study, you need to also examine those compounding variables that may affect the outcome variable. So to summarize all this, we have a data. Still, you have to remember kung ano yung data, kung ano yung level of measurement niya. Now, kung qualitative ba siya or quantitative, kung discrete ba siya, continuous ba siya, at doon sa data mo, ano ang dependent variable doon, ano ang independent variable. So, that's for summary of what we have discussed. Now, going further, class, konti na lang to, no? We also have what we call cross-sectional data and time series data. Ano naman yung cross-sectional data? This refers to the data collected at the same or approximately same point in time. So this is what you call a one-time data measured at a specific time. Ito yon. Cross-sectional siya kasi one time lang. Let's say kinuha mo siya 1980. Reflection lang siya ng data for that year, 1980. Pero pag time series, it's actually a data collected over several time periods. So you can establish a trend and even make a forecast. So it's usually depicted in graphs to help an analyst understand what happened in the past. So time series, iba yon sa cross-sectional data. Okay? Kaya pag you're dealing with time series data, such as this one, you can make projections and you can actually also graph it para makita mo yung trend niya for the past, say, number of years. In this case, this is about the date in periods of from 2005 to 2020 and the net income. So the net income, say, of a particular store or company for a period of 10 years. Oh no, this is 2020, so that's 2005. Then that would be about 15 years of historical data. Maybe this would be about net income. So makikita mo, you can make now a description. You can now narrate, makapag-describe ka na. You can write a narrative on how net income of a particular store performs for the past 15 years. Ayan, class, no? So that's for time series. Now, further on definitions, class, let's distinguish these three: findings, conclusion, and inference. What's the difference between this? When you write your thesis, pag sinabi mong findings, ito ay describing ng result ng investigation, let's say in terms of proportion, referring only to your collected data. Let's say 54% of 100 sample service crews in randomly selected store are 20 years old. So you're describing the proportion of 20 years old out of 100. Okay? That's findings. But when you say conclusion, it's an opinion based on findings. So you're going to generalize now with reference to the population. So you would say, I therefore conclude that 54% of all, take note of the word all, KFC employees nationwide, so you're not referring now to 100 only, but nationwide, are 20 years old and below. So you see the difference between conclusion and findings. Or you could also state, I therefore conclude that KFC prefers employees who are 20 years old and below. So based on the findings class, you make a conclusion. Based on sample, you make a conclusion. But this has to be tested before you conclude. Dapat may test siya. And then inference naman is when you make an educated guess or a meaningful prediction based on findings and conclusion. Kaya meron kang statement like this. If this trend continues, then job applicants, so may magpipredict ka na, job applicants who are 22 years old and above have very slim chance of being employed at KFC. Because based on your findings, 54% out of 100 are 20 years old. So you make a conclusion now na yung mga employee ng KFC nationwide are 20 years old and below. So that if there is a job applicant who is 22 years old, then maybe, no, this is your forecast, that these applicants will have a very slim chance of being employed at KFC considering the findings. So nakita niyo yung differences ng mga yon, class? These are very important when you write your thesis. Okay, class? So that's it, no? That's for Module 1. Kaya meron tayong mga questions dito to test your understanding. This will form part of your first online test. Review nyo na lang, okay? And for your assignment, you have to submit an article that is more than, if the article is more than 2 pages, you make a summary. But you have to submit one research ha, hindi sa news article, research article on any topic. It could be a result of any survey that was conducted, either locally or abroad. And then, if the article is more than 2 pages, you make a summary. You give the name of the magazine or kung anong source nun, si author nun, kailan yon, give the title of the article, highlight the population, yung mga terms na diniscuss natin ngayon. You highlight that, kung anong sample, nag-sample ba siya, meron bang binanggit na margin of error, identity, statements, etc. Find out the population sample used in the survey, upload the assignment in BLE. Type written, alam na natin yon kasi I have discussed this kung paano isa-submit yung mga written outputs. So this is your first assignment, class.